They landed just before dusk. The drop carriers hissed open along the edge of a dry plateau, folding back like insect shells. A full company deployed in silence, faces hidden behind black masks, armored suits humming as they adjusted to gravity. The sky above was pale green, and the wind moved in dry waves across the rock. The soldiers moved with perfect timing, each one acting without the need for instruction. Command tents unfolded and anchored themselves. Surveillance drones lifted into the fading sky. Seismic probes tunneled below. By nightfall, they had eyes on every approach and a satellite lock on the target zone. It was a simple cluster of dwellings beneath the cliff face. A few dome-shaped huts, a narrow irrigation channel cut into the rock. Thermal scans showed no defensive structures, no powered weapons, no signs of a coordinated military force. There were symbols carved into the cliff, not recent and not listed in any language profile. Intelligence noted them without comment. Inside the command tent, the commander stood over a tactical display. His expression remained still, but his eyes were fixed. 3 prior attempts to engage tribal clusters across the region had ended in failure. Plans intercepted and assaults deflected. Somehow, the enemy had seen each move before it happened. Across the tent, a junior officer hovered over a diagnostics panel. He shifted nervously, then finally spoke. "Sir, if I may, these people are not transmitting. They have no grid, no satellites, no uplinks. But someone down there is still listening." The commander did not look up to prepare the strike. The junior officer returned to his console. He did not speak again. Outside, the soldiers finished their checks. Targeting programs ran quietly in the background. Armor cooled and sealed. Helmets scanned the perimeter and found nothing. One by one, the soldiers stepped into position and locked into sleep mode. The moons passed overhead. Thin clouds moved like ghosts across the stars. The cliffs held their silence. An hour before dawn, something shifted. The first soldier to notice was not on duty. He had stepped outside to adjust his suit's temperature seals. As he leaned against the edge of a transport rig, he saw something glint in the distance. He raised his optics and focused on the ridge beyond their perimeter. There were figures standing there. Dozens, maybe more. They did not move. They did not speak. They were tall, thin, and radiant. Their forms pulsed gently with slow, rhythmic light like fire suspended in water. They stood in a perfect line, spaced evenly, facing the camp below. The soldier blinked. He turned his optics off, then back on. The figures remained. He reached for his comm unit, but the channel returned only static. He tried again, adjusting frequency, but the system showed no response. Around him, other soldiers stirred. A few stumbled. One removed his helmet and immediately dropped to one knee, disoriented. Across the camp, systems began to fail. Night vision blurred. Environmental readouts reset. Internal maps showed false terrain. Guidance programs stuttered and collapsed. Within minutes, half the force had gone dark. The commander stepped out of the tent and surveyed the scene. His men, trained beyond panic, struggled to hold formation. Some shielded their eyes. Others backed away from the open air as if struck by vertigo. Weapons remained holstered, but hands shook. No one fired. He came from the valley floor, walking slowly up the center of a dry riverbed. He wore no armor and carried no weapon. His robe was light gray, patterned with faded copper threads that reflected the early light. His face was old and lined. He walked with complete calm. None of the soldiers stopped him. They couldn't. Their targeting systems did not register him at all. For many, his presence was only felt, not seen. He reached the first line of soldiers and paused. The ones nearest to him stood paralyzed. One tried to lift his rifle, but his muscles would not respond. Not from fear, but from something deeper. A resistance not physical, but absolute. The stranger raised one hand and gestured slowly toward the south. Then he turned and began to walk. The soldiers followed. They did not speak. They did not question. One by one, like drifting shadows, they fell into step behind the stranger and moved with him across the rocks, leaving the remains of their formation behind. They walked through gullies and shallow ravines, past thickets of dry brush and old stone towers. No resistance came. The strange glowing figures did not block their way. Some of the figures faded. Others reappeared along higher ridgelines, always watching, always silent. When they emerged from the winding pass, they stood in the center of the tribal settlement. It was larger than it had appeared from above. The dwellings were connected by winding paths lined with cloth banners and bone markers. Smoke rose from chimneys built into the rock. The air smelled of ash, salt, and a resin none of them could name. He stepped from the entrance of a tall, curved structure set into the cliff wall. He was taller than the others, wrapped in a long cloak dyed in a deep red. His face was painted with angular lines, and a broad obsidian blade rested across his back. He looked at the soldiers without expression. Then he looked at the prophet. The two men locked eyes. The air between them grew heavy. The leader stepped forward and began to speak. His voice echoed through the settlement, not loud but forceful. The language was not translated, but every soldier there understood the meaning. He wanted them dead. Across the plaza, a line of warriors appeared, standing silently with spears in hand. Their movements were measured and ceremonial. The execution would be swift. The prophet stepped forward and spoke with a single, uninterrupted sentence. His tone was calm. His words were clear. There was no fear in his voice and no defiance. He simply offered a different path. The tribal leader turned to look at his warriors. He placed his hand on the hilt of the blade. Then, slowly, he let go. He walked to the center of the square and drew a circle in the dust. Then he stepped back. From one of the side buildings, villagers came bearing food. Dried fruits wrapped in leaves. Clay bowls of clear water. Bread baked into spirals. All of it was placed before the soldiers. They were fed. Their armor was cleaned. No one touched their weapons. No one spoke a word of judgment. By the time the sun reached its height, they were guided back to the path. The same prophet who had led them and now stood at the edge of the trail, motioning for them to return the way they came. The soldiers walked in silence. Their gear remained untouched. Their helmets regained function. But the memory of what had occurred could not be scanned or recorded. It lived only in their minds. When they reached the ridge where their camp had stood, the carriers were already warming for departure. The commander waited at the edge, eyes locked on the horizon. The soldiers returned to their positions without speaking. They did not report. They did not explain. In the control tent, the data from the past 24 hours showed nothing but static. The scans were blank. Audio feeds looped endlessly. All sensor logs had been overwritten. A junior officer approached the commander. "Should we go back?" he asked. The commander watched the dust rise beyond the hills. The heat shimmered in the distance. "No," he said. They lifted off just before nightfall. Far across the valley, high above the tribal settlement, the prophet stood alone on a narrow cliff. He looked up into the fading sky. Around him, the fire forms waited, quiet and unmoving. Then, as the last carrier vanished in the cloud, they turned and walked back into the hills. And the world remained still.